Matt Miguez has plenty on his mind, and he's ready to share it with the world. It's time to hear the Miguez Mindset.
Welcome into another edition of the Miguez Mindset here on ESPN 1037 Lafayette and 1041 Lake Charles. Matt Miguez here talking NFL draft as we are 1 week away from that first round in Detroit. And joining me here today to talk about the NFL draft from an analytical perspective is Sam. Sam, I'm going to butcher your last name.
Brookhouse. Very easy to
Okay.
say. It's hard to spell.
See, I was absolutely going to butcher it. Sam Bruchhaus of SumerSports.com. Sam, what's going on, my man? How are you?
Living it up, man. Really excited for this NFL draft. I'll be in Detroit next week, covering it on the ground, and excited to talk some ball with a great Louisiana radio station.
So leading up to the draft, how busy, like what point is the busiest time for you?
Yeah, so for Sumer Sports, which is a third party that comes in and builds software tools and consults and provides scouting and analytics services to teams, our biggest kind of part of the draft is the combine, which is where we deliver our products to the team. And that's pretty much kind of where the draft starts for the teams themselves. Everyone's there at the combine typically, even though kind of in this analytical age, there's less people going to the combine because it could potentially make biases based on some of the stuff. But that's typically where it starts. And then you move through and you have scouts, updating grades, watching more film. The teams will have interviews, workouts with people, pro days, and it's just more kind of ammo to make decisions on. Then you get into that kind of 2-week period where, the hay's in the barn and the evaluations are done. And that's where you really start building that board, or you start using a product like our draft dashboard,
Right.
simulating out what may happen. And then the week leading up, it's grind time for us. We'll be in Detroit. We'll be covering everything. We'll be looking at every angle. And the teams are doing pretty much the same thing, both for themselves and other teams, to get an expectation of what will happen.
So in this new age of analytics, obviously analytics have been around for, decades, but I don't feel like they've taken the leaps that analytics has taken in the last, 5 to 10 years. So just kind of talk to me about the benefits of a team relying so heavily on analytics and the data when it comes to, figuring out who they're going to select in the NFL draft.
Yeah, you mentioned that acceleration last 5 to 10 years. Where this kind of started, particularly in football, is an article that came out by Richard Thaler, who's a professor, and Cade Massey, who's also a professor, Nobel Prize winning, and they just love football. They decided to take a look at the economics of the draft. And what they found practically was that there's a lot of overconfidence that people have, that people will pick. Football is a very difficult game to analyze. And so there's a lot of overconfidence. And what they basically found is that trading back or adding more picks basically allows you to play the variation of someone getting hurt or someone not being as good or
Right.
someone playing less talent or something like that. And that's kind of what we've seen come up in the last couple of years. You have teams like the Vikings who have Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, who's their general manager, who is a quantitative guy, comes from the 49ers. And they're in a position where they've used some of their picks to move up. That's kind of against the analytical way. But my colleague Eric Eager at Sumer Sports has shown that, sometimes the classic analytical view of trade back in basketball, trust the process, and just accumulate as many picks as you can, because it's very difficult to judge which players are better than the other ones. My colleague Eric Eager has shown that, we're pretty confident that quarterbacks are better than most players, or more important than most players in comparison. And so, if you're trying to get that quarterback, it's worth a shot of moving up, because that's where most of them are. But in general, what the analytics say is accumulate those draft picks, play the variation of the draft, and who knows, you'll hit on a third round wide receiver like Michael Thomas, or someone who becomes a generational player.
So in terms of looking at the quarterback, which we can agree is the most important position on the field, is that why you're seeing, these mock drafts have 6 quarterbacks taken in the first round? Because you look, I don't want to disparage Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr., both really solid quarterbacks, both were Heisman finalists. But in terms of correlating your game to the next level, I don't know that I would call them first round quarterbacks. So is it the analytics telling teams to take these quarterbacks?
Precisely. What's going on there is positional importance. And you've seen in recent years how running backs have been paid less and less. And the reason behind that is because the NFL is a salary capped league. You can
Correct.
only spend so much money. And when that's the case, these markets kind of build up. And as a result, the market for the quarterback has built up quite a bit. So if you can get a quarterback in that first round and that player is good, it's a massive increase in the amount of money you can spend elsewhere for those 4 years of his rookie scale contract. There's a lot of discussion kind of surrounding Brock Bowers out of Georgia around this right now, because he excels at 2 very valuable things, which is receiving and blocking. However, you look at the tight end market, and there's not a ton of guys that excel at both of those things. Really, it's just George Kittle, and you have guys like Kelsey who are extremely good wide receivers, but are just bigger, and thus they're listed as tight ends. And as a result of that, they're paid substantially less. So someone like Brock Bowers may drop a little bit in the draft just because you're not getting that extra value over the best players that are getting paid in the league.
Now, staying on the topic of the quarterback, Caleb Williams has been the consensus idea number 1 for a better part of 2 years now. But look, there's a guy that we got to cover here in Lafayette that played 45 minutes down the road that, I said this the other day in a mock draft that I did. If I'm the Chicago Bears, I'm taking Jaden Daniels. Do you agree with that? And if not, why do you think Caleb Williams is the best quarterback in the draft?
I don't necessarily agree with that. And it's for one reason. Typically, when we look at age, that's something that can kind of show us something in the draft. You look at a team like the Browns and very analytically forward. In fact, the Jonah Hill character in Moneyball now works for the Browns. He's their vice president of process or something like that. And they're drafting players in the top rounds, typically that are under 22. And in this kind of COVID era, when you have players like Jaden Daniels that are 24, 25,
Right.
the book's kind of out on them. In terms of what Caleb can do analytically versus Jaden Daniels, you look at what they did last year. Jaden Daniels excels at a bunch of great things. The one thing I would want to call out, though, is that Daniels really struggles in what's called pressure to sack ratio.
Correct.
And basically the idea there is that when you're pressured and you're taken down, that really carries over pretty well to the National Football League. And guys like Patrick Mahomes, guys like Tom Brady, guys like Drew Brees, all of those players had a very, very low pressure to sack ratio. Jaden Daniels, for one, has an extremely high pressure to sack ratio, not only over the course of his career, but last year. And also, he scrambles a lot when he's pressured. No. It's an astounding amount. I was astounded by it. I saw a graph from CFB Numbers today on Twitter. I was astounded by the difference between Jaden and some of the other quarterbacks. He scrambles so much when he's pressured that may not be something that can carry over to that next level. That being said, extremely accurate. He did an incredible job of growing. I think the best comparable for him is a Jalen Hurts type character.
Yeah.
But at this point, when you look at a guy like Caleb, who has kind of excelled over the course of 2 years in so many things, I think the consensus right now is probably okay with Caleb being picked number 1.
The group in terms of position that I think has the most depth in this class is probably wide receiver. I mean, you just have so many guys that can make an impact for you. Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Marvin Harrison Jr., A.D. Mitchell's projected late first round by a lot of draft boards. Talk to me about this receiver class and who's really stood out to you when doing your prep work for the draft.
I totally agree with you. I think this receiver class is incredible. I think we could see anywhere between 4, 5, 6 receivers be
Yeah.
drafted fairly highly day one, if not bleeding into that kind of beginning of day two. You look at guys like Brian Thomas Jr., you look at guys like Roma Dunze, Harrison Jr., all prototype size with great speed as well. Those are things that kind of track to the next level. You also look at a guy like Roma Dunze is my favorite guy in this draft. I don't know if he has quite the upside that a Malik Neighbors or the positional versatility that a guy like Malik Neighbors may have. But you want to see guys that succeed across the route tree. There's an account out there, a website called Reception Perception, which does a great job of tracking this. And Adunze is basically green all the way around. And you look at a guy like Malik Neighbors. You can even look at Jaden Daniels' stats and notice how good he is to the right side. The reason why he's so good to that right side is because that's where Malik Neighbors was lined up.
Right.
And so really it's astounding, and it's very difficult to split hairs, even down to the type of 80 Mitchell guys, to the Xavier Legettes, the Xavier Worthies. It's going to be very difficult for teams to split hairs. So it'll be interesting to see how not only draft day plays out, but even next year and going into the first 3 years of their rookie contract.
New Orleans Saints picking at 14 this year. You talked about the analytics side of how a lot of teams like to trade back and stack picks. Traditionally, that is not something that the New Orleans Saints like to do. If anything, they trade up. So, from an analytic perspective, in your opinion, what do the Saints do at 14? Obviously, they have a glaring need on the offensive line to protect Derek Carr. Do they stay put at 14 and have their pick of, Troy Fautanu or Talise Fuaga? Like, what do the Saints do?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. The Saints typically have not traded up, and we have a pretty big sample size of Mickey Loomis and that whole staff being there for years and years, and obviously Dennis Allen carrying on the Sean Payton tradition there. And they're pretty set at quarterback for now with Derek Carr there, restructuring his contract. He'll be there for the near future. Obviously, we have some holes on defense, but I think you're correct. I'd be shocked if they let Fuaga or Fatanu go down. Those are versatile guys. When you look at our offensive line right now, I'm a huge Saints fan, of course. So when you look at the Saints offensive line, you got Ramczyk struggling with injury, but an all pro caliber player. You got McCoy, another all pro caliber player, struggling with an injury. And you have that left tackle spot, which ideally we'd like to see Penning or someone grow into. But we were okay last year. And I think bringing in, the Oregon State product or the Washington product, a guy that can swing to multiple spots. We've seen depth be a concern for the Saints in years past with guys like Terron Armstead now with the Dolphins falling to injury. I think a guy like that is just going to be very difficult to pass, especially when he does have certified first round talent.
One final question that I have for you, Sam. Do you suspect any major surprises in the first round? Has there been anything, when looking at the numbers, that kind of sticks out?
I think when you look at a guy like Michael Penix, a lot of things disagree. And so we talked about pressure to sack ratio. He has one of the best pressure to sack ratios in the history of college football. But at the same time, he doesn't do a lot when he's pressured. He tends to throw it away. And in the same view, he's a 4.5 speed, according to his pro day, what scouts tracked him at. But he doesn't really run all that much. And so I wouldn't be shocked to see a team. Honestly, I think the fit is there with Sean Payton and the Broncos. I just don't know exactly what they're thinking at any given point in time. I wouldn't be shocked to see Penix, as we're going through the next week, pop up at 12 or a top 15 pick. The other one I think is there's a lot of people are primed to pick JJ McCarthy. I did an article which is live on Sumer Sports right now about how much he's jumped just since November, December in kind of the public's view of big boards and mock drafts. I really would not be shocked to see if he comes all the way up to 3, 4. If a team trades up for him there, if we have 4 straight quarterbacks picked, 1, 2, 3, 4. I would not be shocked to see that as well.
Sam Bruchhaus, former Tulane linebacker and draft analyst for SumerSports.com, joining us here on the Miguez Mindset. Sam, before you run, man, tell our viewers where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can find me at Brookhouse Sports on Twitter or at Sumer Sports on Twitter. We'll be doing a draft extravaganza next week. Thursday, we'll cover all the first picks with former general manager of the Dirty Birds, Thomas Dimitroff, and Eric Eager, one of our vice presidents. I'll be popping in and out of there with live feed from the draft. We'll be doing a late night extravaganza, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., breaking down everything for people coming off the adrenaline of the draft. And we'll be posting all kinds of cool stuff about that. You can also check out my articles about the top 4 quarterbacks. We'll be coming out with Caleb Williams tomorrow. Also, the Class Play podcast on any podcast stream is us breaking down those quarterbacks and breaking down some of the questions that Matt asked me here. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Matt.
Sam, really appreciate you taking the time, man. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at ESPN Southwest Louisiana. Follow us on social media at ESPN_SWLA. We'll be back next week with more of the Miguez Mindset here on ESPN 103.7 Lafayette and 104.1 Lake Charles.